we go. So, Carl Nurse, you are running for the school board. You are a familiar face to the folks in St. Petersburg. But the big question that I have is that why are you running?
Well, if your goal is to reduce poverty, the single greatest opportunity is actually the school system. If
Hmm.
you if you can close the gap early, which is part of what I want to do, and if you can provide more pathways post high school learning, that's a pathway to good jobs. And I don't think there's a single thing you can do that will have more impact on poverty than improving our schools at the beginning and the high school connections.
But personally, why are you running? Because you were on the St. Pete City Council for a long time, and it would be pretty easy to sit back and just say, well, I've done my stint of public service then, but now wanting to jump back into it. Do you have kids in the school district right now or grandkids?
I have grandchildren in elementary schools, but
Uh-huh.
frankly, I was asked by some of the people in the school system to help out because one of the things they thought they needed was one, the 20 years of serving on boards that I've done,
Hmm.
to be able to get things done, and secondly, frankly, somebody at the table who has business experience and is used to budgets with big numbers. And
So,
I've got 34 years of business experience, so
yeah.
that's why.
So let me ask the question that's going to be asked about this district, because this district has traditionally been an African-American district per se, going back to Mary Brown, several others. Renee Flowers is stepping away from that position. And there are some people in the community that I have heard that say, well, we're concerned. It's not a knock on you, Carl, but they have always thought of if a school board needs to have at least some African-American representation. And if you win in this race, there will be no African-American representation. Address that issue if you would.
Well, I think it's really about the children. It's not, I don't think it's about the color of my skin. I think it's about who will be most effective in improving the quality of our schools, which changes the quality of life for the next generation. And I have worked diligently for decades in the inner city of St. Pete, and I would suggest that you'd be hard pressed to find anybody else who made more of a difference in the inner city than me. And that's why I think I can do this job and do it effectively and help the next generation of children.
So what do you think is the biggest issue the school district faces right now, apart from COVID-19? Because we'll address that a little bit later on. But any other deficiencies or areas that you're saying and scratching your head and say, boy, this is what really needs to change?
Well, we have a staggering gap in the early years of kids who arrive at school not ready for school, and we often don't catch them up. You probably know that when you plan for prisons, they look at the percentage of kids who are behind at third grade. And we're not catching kids up enough. And even the school system's goal is to catch up by 2030. And so you shove another decade of kids through the system behind. If you don't catch up early, you really never catch up. And so I would like us to concentrate, include the preschools, but I don't think a child should go to first grade until they're ready to do the work.
And how would you define ready? Having a lot of grandkids, and I see that from school to school, I mean, there is a bottom line per se, but I see that it kind of varies here and there.
Well, candidly, we have lots of tests. We have the ability to test, whether a child knows, recognizes their numbers and letters, and is at the early stages of reading. And I mean, when I worked as a volunteer at Melrose, I mean, we could always measure. The first thing it did was test a kid, and you could measure the kids who were behind entering kindergarten and how far behind they were. We really can measure that, but we think we're doing them a favor by promoting them when they're not ready. And the truth is, you think about both reading and math. If you don't build a solid foundation, you can't do the later grades work. And so it's not doing them a favor, and we need to confront that and make sure that we catch those kids up early.
You know, Carl, a number of years ago, they talked about trying to use PSTA, and now we're talking about starting times and getting high schoolers to class. The idea was brought up, and I think we tried it for a while. I don't know how well, I don't remember it going over particularly well, but some people have thought about bringing that idea up. If you wanted to get high school kids so they could start later, but it's always been a rub because that would change the starting times for elementary and middle school. If you use PSTA, maybe you could start schools later and it wouldn't impact the starting of elementary and middle schools. What about that?
I think that's frankly a good idea. I was on the PSTA as a citizen volunteer uh, 15 years ago, and I know that they were a little nervous about it. But this is an illustration of where various government agencies ought to work together. And it's not going to be perfect because you're not going to have all the routes that are going to work for kids. But we clearly could narrow that gap in starting times if we tried to figure out where was the overlap. And we should be able to do that. There are hundreds of cities across America that do this.
Now, it's taken a long time for the school board to come around to the idea of starting times later for high schools, even though the state of New York adopted their programs, I think it might even be 10 or 11 years ago, because the test results were dramatic in terms of high school kids. So you look at this because time is money. How quickly could a transition be made to this? Because they talk about it, but then the transitions are only in, well, it used to be 7:05 and now it's 7:20. I mean, 15 minutes until you get closer to 8 o'clock. Scientists will tell you, that behavioral specialists, that you don't see as great of impact until you get to that time around 8.
Well, you certainly could implement this in the following school year. That would not be a stretch. You know, you could implement it next semester, but as a practical matter, probably next year.
Yeah. So let's talk about virtual learning. This COVID-19 has been a real eye-opener one way or another. So the question is, when we get done with this COVID-19 thing, whenever that would be, what do you think is going to happen to virtual learning? Because right now there are a lot of folks that have, quite frankly, had it with virtual learning.
I think we're going to do very little of that. My granddaughter's learning virtually now, and I can tell you that it's a 5 or 6 hours in front of a computer for a 10-year-old. Um, Expecting them to pay attention for most of that time is really that's not practical. And of course, we have the worst of all worlds where we're doing simultaneous teaching.
Right. Let's talk about something else in terms of the budget. There's going to have to be cuts. Karl, you've run a business, so you know this yourself, is that when the state picked up some of the cost for providing PPEs and these other things, but this still was a very expensive process for the school board. Additional cleaning that had to be done, additional employees were used for that, trying to fill in the gaps where teachers may come down with COVID-19 and then substitutes have to stand in. Are you worried that this is going to be a real difficult time if you're elected, crunching the numbers on the budget?
Well, I joined the St. Pete City Council just as the Great Recession started. So I really had 3 or 4 years where I spent a significant part of my time turning over rocks looking for opportunities to save money. And I do that at work every day in my business. So I've got a half a dozen places where I would look immediately to save both short-term money and long-term money.
And what are some of those ideas?
Well, I think you look at a wellness clinic, the $158 million health insurance budget. We could do wellness clinics, which the city of St. Pete does, and 3 other county cities. Mm-hmm. Do them in conjunction with them. Could begin to drive those numbers down. We've really only scratched the surface on energy efficiency, and looking at when we have a $300 million construction budget, $390 million, to make sure that we include energy efficiency projects in that. The fleet cost is $25 million. I would do a soft hiring freeze for non-school-based administrators, so that every time you have a vacancy, you ask the question. And the question is, can we do without this? Can we reorganize this? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the answer would be yes. And we found that at the city, and that over time you reduce your administrative overhead.
Sure. And let me ask one last question, Karl, as we're running out of time. Charter schools, what do you think about them? Because we've seen an increase in charter schools. We've seen some good, we've seen some bad. What's your general opinion on charter schools?
Well, our fundamental responsibility as a school board is to make sure that we approve charter schools that are have the educational skills and the financial wherewithal to work. We've had many charter schools go bust here because the school board approved things that were not financially viable. You know, parents want choices, students want choices. You know, we should not be afraid of charter schools if they can provide alternatives for some students. I would expect that will continue, and we should take it as a challenge to the core public schools.
All right, Karl Nurse, thank you so much for talking with us, Karl. Again, that's the District 7 race. You'll only be able to vote for Karl if you're in the District 7 area. Thank you so much, and good luck at the polls.
Thanks. Take care.